this is actually a work about my conditions of labor. When I was first starting to be on the international circuit, it meant getting on planes all the time, and I was very struck by what a peculiar thing air travel was, and in particular, what kind of worldview was instantiated in the planes, but particularly in the terminals. And things have kind of changed since then because there's a new idea of what a shed should be with different kind of roof lines. But it was very much about the things that are now on the wall, which are phrases that mostly talk about the terminal and somewhat also about that little cigar of metal in which we fly across continents and so on. But these, the idea that you're entering a space that's largely imaginary is a way, I finally realized, of diffusing the fears of being in this tin can at 40,000 feet. And this sort of view, this is the opening image, women in space, and this kind of territory that's fragmented. So I would say this was the projection of a postmodern worldview starting in around the 1980s. That it gave up the utopian idea of travel, which was the original impetus for things like Eero Saarinen's TWA terminal in New York, and in favor of something much more dematerialized and brought into our, this particular one is about current design. And this is sort of in between, where the terminal kind of overwhelms you, but really, mostly, they just want you to think about another world, which is either advertising or travel, but then they're constantly reminding, like, you experience the world, but the world is a matter of consumption, and here it's Marlborough, and this is one of the two signature images, which is that, of course, rather than the experience of the horribleness of going to an airport and to fly, it's about the flow of capital. That was an ad for the Wall Street Journal. And that everything is meant to substitute for experience at the airport and in flight. You're given movies and they treat you like a baby, you have to stay in your seat, you have to stay buckled in, you have to move this way, you have to move that way. So, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So it is about a regime of substitution where people are replaced by images which are flat, but it doesn't make any difference because really it's all about distraction while you rush and wait. This is about invisible labor, two forms of invisible labor because we have the people working on the internet, and then we have the cleaner. So both of those are unacknowledged forms of labor. And this, of course, the others are obvious. I recorded sounds on planes and in terminals before you were forbidden from pulling out electronic devices.
So it's like a never-ending project.
Well, yeah, but you're the first person who actually said that. Curators always say, so what years were the project? Mm-hmm. And there's a little, it's like, at the end, there's just a little line, because there's no possibility to end it until I stop traveling, which is a bad habit of mine. And this is about migration and about the neighborhood and its transformation from old school, well, this is transitional, but the old style of store design to hipsterism. And here we have a lovely pair of hipsters in front of the garden store, which now has been completely transformed to look more like Adams, I guess, which is a Polish store that's adapting to hipsterism, but there are any others here right now. This one. Also Polish beer, but it's the Natural Garden, which is hipster taste. This is hipster, and in fact, all of these are hipster. Oh, nice, thank you. And all of these are old school, and they are both in the same neighborhood, but hipsterism is gradually taking over Greenpoint. And here, this is the place that this is 100% hipster, this group. And this is 100% not hipster. So this guy's from Yemen, it's a little store. These women are from Poland, in fact, and these people are from Israel. And they don't know from hipster yet. Yeah. This is hipster, old school. Greece and Yemen. These are the only people who've lived here in Greenpoint, lived here on the corner of my block. Their families have been here for over 100 years. Everybody else is much more recent, and I live halfway down that block. And then there are the people who don't want to be photographed, probably because they don't have any work permit, even though they've been here for a very long time. And in fact, this is one half of a couple that is here legally, but the woman did not want to be photographed, so she kind of left the store. A long-standing Polish store, and very typically they sell flowers. This is an extremely famous Neapolitan pizza shop. Pizza is at home in the borough of Brooklyn, but the store is extremely small. This is Mr. Kumar, who's been there for only 7 years, though at this point it's more like 11 years or 9 years. But he is an entrepreneurial person, starting a number of different businesses, some of which succeed and some of which he sort of abandons. This is an analysis of the development of the neighborhood from the 1850s, which possibly you can read or you can ignore it. And these videos are too complicated to talk about because there's too many of them, but they are about, well, first of all, I should talk about how do I make a video, and in a way I would say as badly as possible. That is, they are meant to look homemade. Sometimes they're much more complicated than it appears, but my effort is to take part in what we used to call cheap media. And in fact, these are in open editions. It was one of the intentions of the early video movement, starting from the late 60s through the 70s and even partly into the 80s, was to have open access of a medium that's cheap and easy to distribute, and instead it's been turned into a kind of limited edition high art, and I'm not interested in that. Quite a number of them are comedies. But some of them are tragedies, like the one about a girl who starved herself to death. Let's start here. This is the second life of my ideas of making montages, which actually started in the other room, and I'll get to that when we get over there. But these are works about representation. And what they're about is the division of the world into the here and the there, in which certain of us, namely us, are entitled to beautiful homes, and other people are entitled to be dead. And there's just no two ways about it. They're all about war, but they're not all constructed with images of war. For example, there is no image of war in this. And this is the First Lady of the United States, Pat Nixon, and this is the actress Faye Dunaway in the movie Bonnie and Clyde. So they have a more metaphoric meaning than some of the others where you can see injured infants, though I do that very rarely, or dead bodies. And here we see the kitchen before we see the soldiers. And here this is about sight, color, war, cosmetics, etc. Cosmetics in a larger sense. And there were 20 in this series. They were never meant to be art. They were always meant to be flyers and agitprop or agitational works. And they were never reproduced in color because there were no color photocopy machines. But they were also, a few of them were in underground newspapers, also black and white. One was in color once, and it was pirated actually, which was okay. But when the United States decided to go to war in 2002, these were from the late 60s through the early 70s. I never signed them or dated them because I didn't want to think of them as art. But I decided that although I was working with a group that I'd helped form called Artists Against the War, that I needed to do something individually or I'd go crazy. So I thought I should go back and make more montages because it's 30 years later and we're still doing the same thing. We're attacking a country that did nothing to us and creating this war furor. So of course I should go and do exactly the same thing. So, I mean, the same strategy, which I knew would make people really, because by this time, these were art. They had joined the art world. So here I am doing the same shit. People were like, what? She's doing the same thing. I said, no, we're doing the same thing. So this is from 2004. There were about 15 or so. And then somebody asked me in 2008, would I do the cover of their magazine of anti-war art? And I thought, it doesn't make sense to pick one of the ones from 4 years ago, so I started making a few more, and there are 3 of them here. And this is on the cover of the magazine. You can see they're actually bigger, because why not? And mostly they're not indoor scenes, though this one is. And because it was on the cover of a magazine, I did include somebody who clearly is wounded. And my daughter-in-law said, oh, you don't do that. I said, listen, it's on the cover of a magazine. People ought to know what is the subject here. So. And this is a bridal gown. The woman in the advertisement actually is holding a speed graphic camera, which makes no sense. And in this scene, which is of a British tank, a man is carrying a rainbow bag, which is really interesting as a visual signal. This black and white woman is the only thing I added to this scene, along with the bride. This man is actually pointing at something invisible in the actual image, which is, you know, all these guys with their hands and pointing and guns and flowers. And they appear to be holding up images of explosions, which I never could figure out. And this, I did this one because people said to me, what do you have against models? Because so many of these are women. They ignored the ones with men in them, and I thought, models. Male models, sure. Because the early series didn't have models in them. They were people in ads or whatever, but not people who clearly were modeling fashion. Whereas the later version, because fashion became so much more popular in the public mind, which is odd. I mean, we don't realize that it's changed, but it has. So there are models, and then so this is sort of the scene from hell. It's called Invasion. And although there are repetitions, the fact is that there are a number of different guys. They look like clones of each other, though. So I thought, oh, these guys are like clones. I'll clone them some more. And this is, you know, what war looks like in the early 21st century, which is bright red explosions. Stepping backward. These are from 1988, and they were election posters, and the reason I included them is very simple. Poland has a bizarre and wholly imaginary love affair with Ronald Reagan, who they somehow see as Saint Ronnie, whereas for those of us who are American, who have any sense at all, he was the equivalent of Margaret Thatcher in destroying so much of the life and welfare of Americans, ordinary Americans. And he's still treated as a beloved saint on the right in the United States, but on the left, it's clear that he is the initiator of neoliberalism, which destroyed so much. Of course, this was a handoff. He was president, this is First Lady, he was the vice president, and he did win the election. This is, again, Nancy worshiping a picture of Ronnie at a convention, which is a real photograph. I didn't do anything. This is a real advertisement, and my approach to this is about phallic women, in which the ideal of feminism, as presented in the newspaper in 1988 and shortly before, is to be aggressive and masculine, as opposed to being women with the power to be actors in the public space. So. And Rambo, of course, was another, I have to explain that Rambo is a movie with an idiot actor named Sylvester Stallone who decided, of course it's completely imaginary, to go look for all the tens of thousands of Americans who were still held prisoners by the evil Vietnamese, which is still an operative myth to this day. And flags fly outside post offices that are black flags that say MIA, missing in action. These are the first montages I did starting around 1965. And they are about the representation of women, labor, art, and so on. And there were about 30 of these, and this is the selection that we brought. This is one of the first because it's about representations of women in pop art. And the other representation of women, I mean, there's the iconic representations, but then, of course, there's the proper role of women. And this is just before feminism reemerged as the second wave movement. These are psychologically obvious, but that's actually a reference to Magritte. This work is still a scandal for some reason. Well, I thought if men like to look at one Playboy nude, maybe they would like to look at a whole series of them all together. And it's called a hot house or harem after Anglo's harem. This is a woman lying in an oil slick, because women are supposed to be like nature. This is 2/3 of a Playboy centerfold with the superfluous part missing. And this more humorous approaches. And the last one I'll talk about, well, I'll just say about this one, which has to be viewed from here. It's called She Sees in Herself a New Woman Every Day, and this is a work from the mid-70s with shoes that were outdated. You wouldn't actually be caught dead in these. I like to work with the fashion of the just past because it's about a certain kind of surreal displacement and rejection. But in addition to that, we were taken at a time when there might be photos of shoes, but not of the photographer taking her picture in her own shoes, and furthermore, shoes that you wouldn't want to wear. But along with it, and it's not playing right now, is an audio tape meditation of a woman having an imaginary conversation with her mother about the way that women pass along modes of oppression to their own daughters. And this is the last one, which is about service and how you know you're superior to the waitress by modes of dress and deportment, and then the ideal drawing, the ideal photograph, and reality, whatever that is. And what I'll say about this is that the waitress is invisible. Every other one, preparation, food quality, sanitation, accounting, customers management, advertising, they all get a word and a spoke, and then it just says, well, the waitress is the rim. She's invisible, but you have to think she's really there, and blah, 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 blah. And then we have the suggestive glance.